Hi, everybody. Welcome to the very first lesson of the year, lesson 1.1. Today, you're only going to need three things out with you. You don't even need a calculator, but you will need your Springboard book to keep notes. You're going to have that open to page 3, a pencil, and a highlighter. So on page 3, when you get there, you are going to see this lesson here. Now we're going to talk about the first page to start. So you're going to kind of chunk under number 7 here, and that's where we're going to stop after this first question. But if you read through the learning targets up here, it says we are going to be able to identify, describe, and name points, lines, line segments, rays, and planes using correct notation, and identify and name angles. Basically, this first lesson is all about vocab, hence why we don't need a calculator. So this first question here says, below are some types of figures you have seen in earlier mathematics courses. Describe these figures in your own words. If you can recall any mathematical terms that identify the figures, you can use them in your description. So take a moment to talk about any of these 7 pictures that you see here, and if any of them look familiar to you. Now, if we move on to then page 3, what we're going to see is the formal names for this. So this is where you're definitely going to want your pencil and your highlighter ready, because this is a big part of the notes today. In fact, I would put a star by this section because it's really important information. So the first figure we see here is a point, and a point is just a dot, and you name it with a capital letter, so uppercase letter. So this example here is point P. Next, we have a line, and we name this using any 2 points on a line. Could be any of the 2 points you see on the line with 2 uppercase letters because they're points, or the lowercase letter you see here that describes the name of it. So it's a couple different ways. Now, one thing you should notice here is that there is an arrow above each of these. I know it's hard to see in your book, but these should be arrows. Because we are talking about lines, they need to be a little line drawn above them. Okay, lines go on for infinity and beyond, so we need those arrows to show that. Otherwise, what we're going to see is a line segment, where you notice there are 2 end points that make up the end of our line segment. They stop. So above them, you will see just a segment bar, no arrows included, so we know the difference between the 2. It does not matter which endpoint you start with. You could call this line segment ST, or you can call it TS. A ray is the next thing on our agenda. Now notice a ray has an endpoint and then goes off to infinity here. So same thing up above it, we're going to have an endpoint and it goes to infinity. Now notice we have to start with that endpoint M. If you have a ray, you always have to start with the endpoint first. It cannot be called, in this case, MN, because the ray needs to be starting with the endpoint. Can't stress that enough. Now notice over here in the reading math box, we call this line AB, line segment ST, ray MN when we're reading this out loud. So this is how we're going to kind of read. So just bring your focus there for a second. Final figure we're talking about here is a plane. And I like to think about a plane as like a piece of paper, right? And you can have all these different points or lines or rays all on a singular plane. Now, planes are named with 3 points that are not on the same line. So notice all 3 of these, you cannot draw one line through any of these 3 points here, here, and here. So they can be called then plane FGH, or you can call it plane HGF or plane GFH, just any combination of those 3 points. Or you'll notice this big curly Q letter up here, this kind of cursive letter. You could also just call it plane, whatever the cursive letter is for that particular plane. Now, if you're confused on any of that, I highly recommend going back and listening to any piece that you may have questions on. Now, this next portion, we're going to look at number 8, and we're also going to talk about 9 and 10 on the next 2 pages. So now we're going to start practicing ourselves going through and identifying each of these figures themselves. So we're going to give all the possible names, right? Which doesn't seem like it's a lot, but obviously you can kind of tell from the box here, it's going to be a lot for a plane. So take a moment on your own to write what you think the name would be to properly write this here, and also say, what is it? Is it a point? Is it a line? Is it a line segment? Take a moment to answer part A. Now you should have gotten that this is a line segment, and you should have had two ways to write this. Either QP or PQ, you have to have that line segment on top, so it must look exactly like this. Now part B here, take a moment now to try part B. What is it and how would you name it? You're going to see here that this is a line. So again, it's very hard to see with the Springboard copied directions, but here you should have line drawn on top of the lines here, and then either NC or CN work is a possible way to name this. Part C, try on your own. What is it and what are some ways to name it? Again, think there's going to be a lot on this one because you have a lot of combinations. Part C is a plane, and you're going to have here basically 7 options because you have all the ways you can write plane, BGT or BTG, all the orderings of this, but you also could just call it plane M because of that cursive letter up top. And finally, part D, what is it? How do you name it? Well, it's a point, and you would name it point D with capital letter. Next one. Okay, draw FE and explain what it's going to look like on that ray. So notice this is ray FE. Again, not very clear on my notes, so hopefully it looks better in your book. But ray FE, draw it. What does it have to look like? Well, it's really important here that when you draw this particular one, that your picture included F being the end point. Okay, now it does not matter if you drew it FE that way, or maybe you drew it as FE going this way, but here's F and here's E. That's fine, but again, that endpoint has to be F because our array is written with F first. This next one's kind of tricky. I'm going to give you a moment to try this one on your own. Number 10, Caleb says that the figure below can be named line KJ. Jen says the figure can be named line JL. Who is correct? Explain your answer. Well, the reason this one is so tricky is because it's a trick question, right? They both are correct. We can name it using any of the 3 points on that line. So we could call this line JK. We can call this line JL. We can call this line KJ. We could call it line KL. Because it's going on for infinity, it's assumed it's going to go through there. So both of their answers are acceptable. All right, now down here to kind of finish this out, is SR a possible name for this figure here in number 11? What do you guys think? Well, hopefully you said no, because the R must come first in the ordering because it is the end point. You have to begin with your end point is another thing you could have said. All right, and that would be R in this case, not us. All right, number 12 says if Graham draws a point, describe how he could name it. Well, hopefully you said that it should be a capital letter. Okay, so maybe he wants point G for Graham. So dot with a G. All right, last but not least, we have to talk about angles for today. Now, angles are made up of 2 rays with a common vertex. Now, we have a bunch of different ways we can name it, and those are listed right here. So again, I would star this section because it's important to go back and memorize how we name our angles, and notice you have a vertex on your angle, right? And that's where those two rays meet. That's that common endpoint. And you can either name it by calling it angle B based on the vertex. You could call it angle 1 if they give you a number here, angle 2, angle 3, depending on what number they give you here. Or the most common way is using 3 letters. Now notice the vertex is always the middle letter, but then you can name it either angle A, B, C because those are on there. Maybe you want to name it A, B, D because D is also on the other side of our vertex than A. You could name it CBA, that, or you could name it DBA. Notice all of these are in reference to the same angle. So that's why we have multiple options on that. Right, so flipping the page to page 6, you are going to notice here that there are some more examples. So take a moment on your own, try A, try B. Again, try figuring out all of the possible names that you could have there. All right, what you should have gotten is 3 for each. You should have had angle 3, angle X, Y, Z, angle Z, Y, X, or just angle Y, right, for letter A. Now, letter B, we are going to actually have a total of 5 options. Now, notice here there isn't a number, so we can't use that, but we could just call it angle C. We can call it angle SCN. We could call it SCF to use that other piece over here. We could have used angle NCS to go from here to here, or FCS. Again, the important thing here is that that vertex is the middle letter on all of these, okay? All right, final information about angles here. Draw a figure for number 13. I'm going to write it over here. That could be called LMN. Well, what is something important to notice about this ordering? Well, the key here is that you notice that M is the vertex. So wherever we draw this angle, since M is in the middle, we need LMN. Could have made it NML, all right, but M had to be in the middle, right, because of the way it was ordered. Now, in number 14 is angle FDE, a possible name for the figure to the right. The answer is yes here, okay, because FDE is appropriate. D is our vertex, and it's in the middle of our naming. Very, very, very important that you make this angle sign in front so we know you're talking about an angle and not a plane. All right, last but not least, how many different line segments does the figure to the right have? Well, if we're looking at this figure here, let me erase for a second so you can see this a little better again, or in your notes. Officially, making up this angle, we could see 2 different line segments. For instance, the first one could be ED or DE, depending on how you want to name it. And then the other one here is DF or FD, depending on how you wrote that. So the final answer here is there are 2 line segments included in that angle. Okay. Focus a little bit more on the vocabulary in class then when we chat on tomorrow. Thanks.